On today's episode, we analyze why ruining childhood heroes for the sake of change is actually a good thing. We learn that masks make you more attractive. We'll take a look at a fictional Joe Rogan story, walk through a typical false choice fallacy from the left, and finally, learn about why capitalism is holding the world back. This is Cringe Post. Hey friends, welcome to the Cringe Post podcast. At this podcast, what we do is we go through our social media feeds. We find political or non-political takes that are kind of cringy or maybe make some sort of silly argument, and we go through those, pick them apart, debunk them, and give you guys reasons why, so you don't have to, do it yourself on your feed. Although we do encourage you to, after you watch our show, to go debunk these when you see them. My name's Britt. I'm here with my podcast host, Donald Kimball. And we're going to get right into it. But before we do that, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our show. It really helps us out to grow the show. And we've got some goals in 2022. And we want to keep growing our show and being the anti-cringe to the cringe that is out there on the internet. And there's a lot of it, as you probably know. Also, something new that we're doing, we've got a visual show companion. So for those of you that are listening, on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever, if you want to actually see the cringe posts or maybe see the videos that we do, you can just go to cringepost.com and click on the link there. And there's a Google Drive with a slide deck that has all of the different cringe posts that we'll go through today. It's just labeled episode 39. So before we get into other people's cringes, we usually take shots at ourselves because we want to show that, hey, sometimes we say things that are cringy in the past and we learn and grow from them. And today I get to roast Donald Kimball, my co-host. And on August 11th, 2012, Donald tweeted, "Santorum on the Huckabee Show? Yes, please. No, thank you."
Well, I'm trying to think, in that particular year, I don't even know that my parents would have had the cable package that had Fox News.
Oh my
so
gosh.
My guess is that it must have been somewhere else I was seeing it, because I really didn't watch the Huckabee Show that often, right? I think even that aged Donnie, because I think it's got to be 2011 or something like that, because I had my Twitter account. But even that aged Donnie, I think, would have seen through a little bit of Huckabee's show being kind of pathetic and not full of anything, right? This was mostly just sort of, I picked a guy I liked from the presidential debates, who said he was Tea Party and spouted Tea Party lines. And then he was on the Huckabee Show, and I, for some reason, thought Huckabee was funny and clever, as we've seen in other, past cringes. Because he sort of had that, I don't even know what you call it, but that wry sort of humor that's kind of trying to be witty but not that witty. Anyway, but I was like, oh yeah, it's my two guys together or something, and it just really, I don't know, really did not hit.
Dude, I mean, I've talked about before, but my only time I ever saw the Huckabee Show was there was a band I was a big fan of that was they were doing a live performance on the Huckabee Show, and he insisted to play bass with them. It's dude, this is so freaking weird, And that's what I remember. I saw a Time article about Huckabee as a candidate, and I was like, oh, this guy seems awesome. I'll probably vote for him. And then I saw the band appearance, and I thought, oh man, there's no way I can vote for this cringy guy. And he sat on a freaking stool for the performance. I was just like, dude, this is embarrassing. Yeah, some of those conservative shows are just so bad, man. They're just I guess they're geared towards a demographic that's kind of the older side, right? But trying to mix in some new stuff, so it's just the perfect storm for some cringe.
Yeah. I don't know. I like I said, I never really watched the Huckabee Show that often. I probably saw an episode or two here or there, because we literally didn't have cable. So the other aspect is, sometimes we have political takes, sometimes we have personal cringes. This is kind of both, because in a way I'm really virtue signaling to a degree, where I'm like, oh yes, this thing that I really like, but I don't even really know what I'm talking about because I didn't watch the show that often. So it's oh, look, I can show how cool I am that I like this show. I don't know. Very cringy.
That's
and
yes. And we're going to have a take on Joe Rogan later that I think holds up to kind of that same standard. It's on the other side, right? But it's people saying one thing or another about some sort of show or book or anything. It's kind of like quoting from a book that you've never read, right? It's like, it's like, okay, like, this isn't great.
Yeah.
So moving along to those takes, the first one we're going to take on is more of a cultural one, but I think it kind of, it's a little bit more lighthearted, but I think it has some good broader implications. And this is someone on Instagram, and it's a reply to there's a Star Wars page, like Star Wars, like the fiction series, that basically said, hey, like, I don't really like the Book of Boba Fett because it's changing everything we know. Like, it's not staying faithful to the characters. And this person replied to that post and they said, I see the same issues that surrounded The Last Jedi. And while there were a few flaws with the film, it got back to Star Wars roots, where it challenged everything you know about it again. Empire challenged us by saying that a villain isn't just a faceless killer, but has depth and can be redeemed. The Last Jedi challenged us in one way by saying that even our childhood heroes have flaws and portrayed that realistically. Now, the Book of Boba Fett is challenging us by asking us to reconsider what we think about bounty hunters and aliens. People just don't like change, which is sad, but we shouldn't make the same mistake as with The Last Jedi, and we should give this a fair chance. Now, you and I have had a lot of discussions about this. I've had many discussions with people that like The Last Jedi, as well as Star Wars, and I think that the thing that drives me nuts is when people think, oh, something is good because it subverts all of our expectations, right? That's not the signal of a good story, right? Like, I could have, My Little Pony show up in Star Wars and that would subvert everyone's expectations, right, about what's going on, but it makes no sense to the story. And so it's kind of a weird cultural thing because it's very deconstructionism, like coming into fiction and good storytelling. And The Last Jedi was terrible because it took the arc, a really great arc of the original trilogy, of the hero's journey and redemption, redeeming the father figure of the past and then moving on and learning, about your mistakes. And it totally destroyed that, right? Like, it totally backtracked the person to even someone that was worse than when they started and we were first introduced to the character. And then for them to put this little snippet in, and for those of you that don't watch Star Wars or anything, the Book of Boba Fett is about a bounty hunter named Boba Fett who had like 5 minutes of screen time. We've only ever seen that, and he's not a hero. He's a bounty hunter that captures or kills people for money, right? And in this new show, I mean, there's only been 3 episodes out, but basically they've made him into this almost like do-gooder kind of guy. And that's what they're talking about when they say, oh, well, it makes us reconsider, what we think about bounty hunters and aliens. It's like, a bounty hunter captures or kills people for money. Like, that's what they do, right? And he doesn't want to be a bounty hunter anymore, but like, that doesn't seem very consistent with his character. And anyways, I thought this was just really cringe because it's like, well, it's a good story because it subverts your expectations. That's not the definition of a good story.
Yeah, I want to hit exactly on that. There's so many things to talk about here, and Britt and I have joked that we could have a show talking just about like cringy pop culture, either Star Wars or other takes. But one thing that I see in cultural critiques and political ones is the idea that because you're doing something that can be a good thing means that because it fits in that category, it is categorically good. So for instance, like you're saying, it subverts our expectations. Well, oftentimes subverting expectations in a story can be the mark of a good story, right? You can use that to great effect because you don't want a predictable story. But just because it subverts expectations does not mean that it, A, is appropriate to do in that particular moment, or B, the quality of that subversion is any good. So, for instance, one way that I would say, like in The Last Jedi, spoilers, this has been out for years now, but you have Luke Skywalker, who by the end of the original series of Star Wars, his whole thing is that he saw the good in the most evil man in the galaxy. He's like, I can still save my father. He's, this horrible Darth Vader, destroys planets and with no mercy. He's like, I know there's still good in him. I'm this optimistic, hopeful, measured, but reasonable Jedi who can see the good in people, right? And then in The Last Jedi, they turn him into this old, skeptical, person who runs away from the fight, says there's no hope, there's no chance for anything. The complete opposite of what you'd expect, right? So there's that subversion. Now, there might be an argument to be had that that if the most traumatic thing in the world happened to him, that he would come out this way. But all they give is this, like, he had a vision that one of his Padawans would turn evil, and for a moment he considered killing the Padawan. And that was it. That's what suddenly turned him into the most jaded man in the galaxy. And it's so to me, it's like it subverts the expectations, and it creates this, morally gray, I guess, person who's not so optimistic, which could, in isolation be interesting plot points. But they're done so terribly to a character that it does not fit at all in a way that does not make any sense. And so to me, that's exactly right with this show, The Book of Boba Fett, where you see, the last time you've seen this bounty hunter who had to be told no disintegrations, right? Like he would be so prone to disintegrate his target because he doesn't care about them, right? Human life is worthless, kind of a thing. This character has been swallowed up after being attacked, in a fight by the rebels and like a Jedi and all that. He's swallowed up by this horrible beast. He crawls his way out of a beast that he should not be able to escape through the sheer force of will and grit, which was a really cool scene. I actually really liked that. That was a great opening. And then he doesn't want to be a bounty hunter anymore. And you're like, okay, well, after a grueling, turn, I can see that.
Yes.
And he makes these arguments like, I want to rule this area with respect. And you're like, okay, well, if you're fierce and you're respected because of your ferocity and I can see that from this guy. And then the entire show so far, it has not aired in its totality. Maybe there's something that will retroactively change how I view this, but he's been kicked around, beaten up, and unwilling to be tough. And he's, like you said, a do-gooder. So it's like there's nothing in his plot story that would change the way that he feels about people, or if anything, he should be more embittered because he was just sent into the beast by these people that he was trying to fight. So sure, I can get maybe he doesn't want to be a bounty hunter anymore because he just was swallowed by a beast. But if there's nothing in there that would make him like, well, now I need to be kinder to people. Sell your water for less. Stop gouging these people. It's absurd.
Yeah, I think and in no way does the show make this like point or character arc, but maybe he looks back and he's like, well, like, look, I was on the side of the bad guys all this time, and look where it got me. But that would be the only way I could justify it, and maybe they will make that point, but that's the only way I could see him having an about face. And I think this takes me to the broader point. And I know you haven't watched The Matrix or anything like that, but like Carissa and I watched the new Matrix, right? And like in the old Matrix, you've got this character. I don't think this really spoils it. And for those of you that haven't seen the old Matrix, like it's been literally 2 decades now. But you've got this character who is struggling with destiny and like becoming a hero, and how you kind of deal with all that stuff and the weight of expectations and sacrifice and all these things. And he overcomes and he's victorious, right? And then it's about like breaking out of the mold and all these different things, not submitting to comfort so that you can actually make good change and grappling with reality. And in the new Matrix, the main character is worse off than when he first started. He's literally backtracked to, he seeks out comfort, has to be medicated, is totally, he's basically just like submissive to the machine. And I just can't help but think it's like, man, like I look at Boba Fett, I look at Luke Skywalker, I look at, Thomas Anderson or Neo from the Matrix series. And I'm like, man, like there's like almost like a cultural like objective to destroy our childhood heroes that taught us lessons, right? To totally destroy their character. And that is really sad to me, right? And it makes me shudder when I think about people making new continuations of like the Lord of the Rings series for Amazon, or any of these new Star Wars shows or Marvel shows or anything like that, because it's like, man, they're just trying to destroy kind of what made young men or young women have an idea of what a hero is, right? What virtue is, and it's totally backtracking that, which is really sad.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And the one thing I forgot to mention in my first, I said I see this in politics, and nothing I said was really applicable to politics. But the connection I wanted to make there is kind of in this last line where the guy says, people just don't like change, which is sad. We need to give it a chance or whatever. And that's sort of connecting to that idea that like just because something is different or because it subverts expectations, that means it's necessarily a good thing, which is not true. I think the same thing happens in many political talks where it's like we just have to do something, right? We the status quo is bad, so we have to enact a policy. And it's like, okay, the status quo can be bad, and you can still have a worse policy that you're enacting or idea that you're advocating for. Just because you're advocating for change does not mean it is a positive change. Like with our healthcare system, right? we don't like our current healthcare system, but just because it's bad doesn't mean that we need to go to a government-run thing, because that is a qualitatively worse decision. So anyway, so aside from the cultural implications, which I think Britt hit on the right on the head of the nail there, I would say that the other thing about this post that makes me annoyed is this line of reasoning where it's the only reason that people don't like it isn't because of the qualities that Britt have listed, it's because it's a change and people are resistant to change. And that's ridiculous and that's stupid. And I saw that so much where people, when they were, especially when The Last Jedi came out, they were like, people just don't like it because maybe their childhood heroes aren't so perfect as they were, and it's like, no, I don't like it because you've done a bad job of making these changes. I could see a world in which Luke Skywalker was jaded and hardened, but you didn't do it right. It's kind of like when people would make fun of me for getting mad at like some of the goofy force powers they introduced in the latest series, and they're like, oh, so you're okay with space wizards with laser swords attacking, but them being able to use a power to heal themselves is a bridge too far. Okay. And it's like, no, what I have a problem with is them breaking their own universe rules. You establish rules in a universe, you're like, here's this world that's not ours, here are the rules of this universe, and then someone else coming along years later and saying, actually, some of these rules aren't true, we're gonna go back and change them. And it's this, again, sort of this postmodern idea of deconstructing either the rules of the universe, the people's traits, their characteristics, what was good or bad about them. And that's just, that's just kind of frustrating.
It makes for bad storytelling that people, and this is the funny thing, like people will say, well, I just didn't find it very realistic. It's like, okay, like that's a really interesting thing for someone to say. It's honest, one. And then two, it's like, you're saying you don't find a universe where you've got space wizards with laser swords realistic. Like, what are you actually saying, right? And what they're actually saying is, hey, these characters don't seem real to me. It seems like this is a plot-driven movie or story instead of a character or theme-driven story, which are the best type of stories, right? The best type of stories take real characters, they build a universe around them, and then they say, okay, they're in this situation. It could be absurd or normal. What happens, right, when these type of characters are in there? And they're archetypes, right? And they let them play it out and see what happens because those characters are alive in their own way. And when you're saying, like, when you've got someone who's untrained as a Jedi, Rey, and whose only plot point, I really enjoy that you've said, is that she's lost her memory, and she can suddenly do a force power that the most talented Jedi of basically the entire series up till then was never able to do, could only dream about doing. It's like, this makes no sense, right? And that's when people say, I don't find it realistic. That's what they mean. Not that having force powers in space is realistic. It's that the story itself isn't. Right, exactly. And then one last thing I will say is that all of this is sort of catered in this. People just don't like change. Give it a fair chance. You don't have to say that about everything because, like, for instance, Star Wars put out a show called The Mandalorian not that long ago, and it was fantastic. It included Boba Fett. Everyone loved that cameo because it was true to his nature. It changed. The Mandalorian's plot point changed a lot about Star Wars. It introduced a lot of new things that we didn't previously know about characters. It actually was the one that introduced some of the changes about Boba Fett and Jango Fett, if I recall correctly, that they weren't Mandalorians and, it was good. And things like that. And people liked it because the story was well done. It did not feel forced. So there were subversions of expectations. There were changes, but you didn't have all these people protesting like, oh, people just don't like change, because the change that happened was done realistically. I can buy in. Even if it wasn't my favorite, like, oh, I liked the idea that Jango and Boba were Mandalorians. But if they changed that in a way that was realistic, to me, it was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll buy this because they've built the universe and they've told the story in a compelling way with realistic details and compelling ideas. So you don't have to, make this, you just don't like it because it's new, because that's not true. Well written and well received new things do get well received, I think. Yes, they do. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a Daily Mail story by Sam Baker, and he wrote this article, and the headline of it And I read the article. It basically says the same thing, that wearing of face masks makes you more attractive to the opposite sex, study finds. And I read through it, and the study was of 33 people, so not a very big sample size. And I'm assuming there was some selection bias. Maybe he just interviewed people at his office. I'm not sure. I actually don't. I think it was a third-party study, but basically they're saying, yeah, like people found people that wear masks more attractive. And he tried to chalk up to all sorts of reasons, between like, well, it makes you focus on the eyes of the person, or it signals that they're of a certain type of political affiliation that makes them more caring or empathetic. And I was telling my wife about it, and she's like, well, for a lot of people, if you cover 2/3 of their face, they are going to become more attractive, right? But I just think it's just it's so like to me, it makes it so clear that the propaganda machine is working overtime, right? It's like, because it's like, oh, well, just wear a mask, you'll be more attractive. It's like, this is such a stupid point that no one actually believes in their heart of hearts, right? Like, if you're going to go date someone, you're going to say, you're going to want to look at a picture of them without a mask on, right? Because it's just like, I want to know what their face looks like. Who knows? Like, after the bridge of their nose, that changes a lot about how a person looks. And not that, love or anything like that should purely be based on looks, but that matters, right? To actually have an honest view of who a person is to see all of them.
Totally. And the funny thing is, to me, I mean, you made a great points. One, the machine working overtime. Like, when you get to the point where you're doing a study of 33 people so that you can produce a headline like this, that to me shows that you are working overtime, because the point was not a study that was comprehensive and definitive. The point was to have a study where you could make this the headline. All the details, who cares about that part, right? Number two, masks making you more attractive. I don't know how the study was done. My guess is that it was like you saw someone with a mask first, you rated them, and then you saw them without a mask and then rated them again, or something like that would be my guess. But it's not like, let's say I find my wife, attractive, and then she puts on a mask and I find her more attractive. It's more that most people I'm not attracted to, because biologically speaking, like you have certain things you look for, and the way that you are, attracted is specific. So on average, there are more people I am not attracted to than attracted to. And so it's like, if you cover up the features that my brain processes as unattractive, well, of course, I'm going to find them on average more attractive, right? It's like, I don't know. It's to me, it's like you're basically bringing the level of unattractive or unattractedness down, not raising the level of attractiveness up. It's, if the middle is I'm completely neutral on you, and then anything above I find you attractive, and anything lower I find you less attractive, at most you're bringing the bottom up to that middle level, not above the attractive. And no one in that attractive threshold is going to be raised by the mask. That's such a stupid idea. And then, like you said, of course you have to, like, I don't know, in any kind of meaningful way that finding someone attractive matters, it's like you're gonna want to see them without their mask on, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, honey. Do you mind doing the dishes in a mask? I find you more attractive that way. Can you walk around the house in a mask until after you shower? Like that's
no one says that. No one says that.
Well, maybe some people at CNN or something like that.
Yes.
There are
or
some
the Daily
weirdos
Mail
out there. But
yeah.
Actually, sorry, CNN's probably telling them to take more off than they should. But anyway, it's an absurd idea. And it really is trying to feed into get everyone on board from every angle into this mask propaganda, even if it's just so that you can talk about with your friends, like, hey, it's going to make us more attractive, as a joke, not taking it seriously, but having that positive spin just be in the ethos, or the atmosphere.
Yeah. There's something ominous about it too, in that I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, we were going to a grocery store, and they only were allowing like 30 people or something like that into the grocery store at a time. And so they had us all wait outside in masks, 6 feet apart. And I remember looking at everyone, and it's like, man, people are literally like muzzling themselves, right? Like, we're literally putting something over our mouths so we can go grocery shop. And no one has a good reason for it, right? And there still is not, with the cloth masks at least, like they basically all but admitted that they don't work, right? And that's, they're like, now you got to wear an N95. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it. Like, an N95 does stop a lot of particles. That's like, I wear that if I'm sanding or doing anything like that. But like, that point aside, I just think it's so weird that it's like, what is the point of saying something like this? The point is to convince people that, hey, masks are here to stay. You will be more attractive if you wear them. You'll be more societally accepted if you wear them. It's good for your health and all these things. And it's just so weird. It's like, okay, I'm gonna cover up most of what makes me, right? My biggest self. I got a passport photo today, right? I can't get a passport photo with a mask on. I have to take my mask off when I get a passport photo because what identifies me as me is not a third of my face or my forehead. It is my whole face, right? And I think that's what's so ominous and kind of creepy to me about these things is like it makes it hard for people to communicate because a lot of communication, you read someone's lips when they read, right? You correlate that with the audio that you hear, and then two, it makes you kind of into this. You see thousands of people with the same blue mask walking all over the place. It's like everyone looks the same. And that's like all individuality is being stripped, and it is being done in such a way that makes it virtuous. And that it's just ugly and creepy.
Do you know if that study covered if a mask made someone extremely attractive if the mask was a 99.8% survival rate printed on front? Was that
I don't know
the thing that
or if it was one of those ones that had like the clear thing, like you see those people with the clear. Maybe I think those people are. It's because I see their spit on. I'm like, oh, they're gross.
I know that those ones creep me out. Like I appreciate what they're trying to do. I just don't think it does.
It doesn't work. It doesn't do what they think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
No.
All right. Moving on to our next one. So we've got a post, and this was kind of in correlation with the Joe Rogan Spotify, petition where people petition Spotify to get Joe Rogan off for having Dr. Robert Malone on. And this post sets up a fictional situation, and it says, Joe Rogan speaking, hamburgers are good, but I'm trying to eat less pork. Then the guest replies, hamburgers are made with beef. Joe Rogan then says, ham is from pork. It says ham in hamburger. The guest says, it's beef, though. And then Joe Rogan replies, that's not what I've heard. Jamie looked that up. And then Jamie says, it's beef. And then Joe goes, okay, but can we really trust hamburger makers and butchers and grocery stores when the word ham is in hamburger and ham means pork? And then Joe Rogan fans, this is why I like him. He is good at thinking. And I just thought, okay, like you don't like Joe Rogan so much that you had to set up a fictional scenario that is incredibly dumb and not ever, it's just dumb, to illustrate your point because you've never listened to the Joe Rogan show. Like this is not how it goes on there. If you ask someone, I thought about this because I was talking with someone. They're like, "Do you listen to Joe Rogan?" Like I just can't stand that guy. Like we've done it before. We've had a post on here before where guys like, well, he edits his conversations. It's like you've never listened. It's 3 hours of talking with a guest, interviewing them, and he pushes back or whatever. And I just think this made me cringe so much because it's like this person had to invent a situation, right, to make Joe Rogan look bad. They can't actually engage with his arguments or the merits of his show. They have to literally straw man to make their point.
The funny thing to me too is that even in this example that they fabricate to make Joe Rogan and his fans look dumb, to me it's like, this actually does demonstrate why I would like Joe Rogan, because even if this was the hypothetical scenario, the guest has done no work. They have asserted it is beef. Jamie looks it up, but Jamie hasn't even cited a source. And Joe's bringing up all these questions. Now, they might not be true, but I would rather those kinds of questions even be asked at all rather than the assertion it is this way. If this example would have even been more to its own point if it said the guest is like, well, actually, if you look at a hamburger, it's made from this type of meat, which comes from this part of the cow, so it's actually classified as beef, and then you would have
he would admit it, and he would admit that they were right. Yeah.
That's the thing. If I have a problem with Joe Rogan, the bigger problem I have, I should say, with Joe Rogan is oftentimes he's too willing to cede to the experts when they give a reason. Because, for instance, he had Bernie on at one point and he's talking with Bernie and Bernie gives his explanation because, of course, Bernie's going to have his justifications for his beliefs. And he presses him and I like that, and he asks him questions. And then eventually he's like, yeah, I could see how that would, I agree with you there, or I appreciate that point. And to me, I'm like, no, you should have pushed him more, But it's like when he actually has experts on who do know, who give reasoning, he'll basically take them to the logical end of that point, like this example does to an absurdity. But once he doesn't have the questions anymore, then he generally will cede, or he's pushed the guest sort of off their own reasoning cliff, like I think he did with Dr. Gupta, right? And so it's funny because this whole example is supposed to make him look stupid, but it's also like
this is how you would do it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is exactly right. And they're trying to boil down something that we all know as fact because we have a very tangible experience with that thing. But when in reality, he's asking these questions about stuff that we don't have a tangible reality on. And we are just told to trust the experts. We are just supposed to buy that it beef, right?
Yeah. Yes. It beef, because that's the extent. Like I love the show that he had with Sanjay Gupta, because Gupta went on there, who's a doctor, an expert, CNN's expert, and literally made assertions about like, well, I don't think that young boys are more likely to get myocarditis from the vaccine after they get the vaccine. And Joe's like, no, they are. Here's the study. They did it. They're more likely to be hospitalized with myocarditis than be hospitalized with COVID. And Sanjay Gupta's only way to reply was like, no, I don't think that's true. It's like, well, here's the study. Joe links to it, shows it, reads through the sample size, reads through all the different data points. And then the CNN expert that is on every weeknight, talk about medical stuff, giving medical advice to people, has no reply, right? Totally gets destroyed on there. And it's like, okay, like, and sometimes Joe's wrong, right? Like he had, I can't remember who it was, but he basically had this debate, like, because he's a big proponent of like carnivore diet, right? You only eat meat and all these things. And he had someone on that kind of challenged that point, right? And it was like a fantastic debate, and he had his mind changed in some ways. And I really enjoy your point about like if this exchange was about anything other than something we knew for a fact, right? Like we know beef comes from a cow, and it was something we didn't know, right? Like I guess the vaccine's a great one, right? It's like, well, tell me why the vaccine works. And then someone just says, it work. And it's like, no, but like, I don't, like it's chemicals being put into your body. Tell me why it works. And then the guest just says, it work. It's like, okay, that's not acceptable, right? And that's any reasonable person would take that line of questioning. And as my brother puts it, and I think it's a great way to describe Joe, like Joe is one of the smartest dumb people out there, right? Like he's willing to ask questions because he knows he's dumb, right? Like he knows he doesn't know. He knows a lot about Taekwondo, knows a lot about mixed martial arts, and he knows a lot about like hunting, and he actually knows a lot. It was ironic because he knows a lot about meat, right? He knows a lot about meat, more than the average person. But the stuff that he doesn't know about, he's like, I'm going to have an expert on. I'm going to talk to them for 3 hours and ask everything I need to know and I want to know, and we're going to get to the bottom of it. Name any other, like, it's like, if Dr. Fauci wanted to make his case to a lot of people, he wouldn't be going on CNN for 500,000 people a night. He'd go on Joe Rogan for 3 hours where everything gets fact-checked, and that has 50 million people that listen to the episodes, and he would lay out the case to it. But he doesn't do that. And you know why? Because he doesn't have the evidence to back it up, right? Or at least that's what it is until he goes on there and he tries to make his case. And that's what I just find so funny. It's like the people that are so certified are not willing to talk for 3 hours to someone that is open-minded. They have to talk on their home front, at CNN or wherever it is.
Yeah, that's it. And I find that this kind of post is difficult to, I don't know, to process in your mind, because you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, that sounds like him, or like, huh, and you kind of, if you're neutral or sympathetic, you kind of smirk and walk away. And if you're skeptical or neutral, you might look at it and think, huh, well, gosh, is that really what it's like? Am I being duped and tricked? But when you boil it down, right, like, again, he's not asking these things about, tangible things that we all know and can see and can verify. These questions are being asked about the things that we don't. And so this post is little more than like having a conversation in a stupid voice, being like, I'm Joe Rogan and I ask questions. That's what this post is. And you're like,
yes.
Yeah, I like it when Joe Rogan asks questions. I ask lots of questions. And it's like, you're just making a dumb voice. You're not actually making a point about why he's doing what he's doing is wrong, right? Yep. If I didn't have access to like an ingredient list that was verified by people, and if we didn't have the level of accessibility of what pork and beef is, what the difference is, then yeah, I would want him to press these kinds of questions about hamburger and pork and beef, because we don't have access to that. But because we do, this isn't something he's gonna press. And so I don't know. It's just I actually saw this one and I didn't even clip this one because I was thinking on it. I'm like, there's something wrong with this, but I need to mull it over.
I think it was our mutual friend, but yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a Twitter post, and this person writes, "I'm confused. How can one be pro-life and pro-death penalty? Pro-life and pro-AR-15? Pro-life and anti-food assistance? Pro-life and anti-healthcare? Pro-life and anti-insulin? I just don't get it." And this is kind of a classic, like, this or that, or setting up, a false choice, right? If we're gonna get more specific, and it's like, okay, like, let's just take the easy one, right? Like pro-life and pro-AR-15. Well, if someone breaks into your house and wants to kill your kids, and you have an AR-15 and you use it to defend yourself, that sounds pretty pro-life to me. So, a lot of these kind of crash in, or cave in on their own once you kind of get into more specifics on it. I just thought this was a great example of how a lot of the left's arguments are, because this is a very lefty person that posted this. They set up this false choice that's like, well, if you want to, help poor people, we need to authorize $5 trillion, for the government to spend how it's going to be. Like, if you don't do, and I saw a sign on the side of the road today. So in Washington State, we've got some bills coming up for gun control. And one, I can't remember the name of the bill. It's like SB 5207 or something stupid like that. It's basically like, have safe schools, pass SB 5207, and it's like, okay, that law or that bill, and that's not the number, just to clear the air for everyone, but that bill, I read through it. It basically says, hey, we're going to ban all semi-automatic rifles and magazines that have over 12 rounds capacity. It's like, how do you can associate any benefit you want with any bill you want, but that doesn't mean that they're actually connected, right? That doesn't mean this certain policy or this sort of thing is actually connected with it. It's like, yeah, maybe I am anti, having people get food assistance from the government. That doesn't mean I'm anti-charity for it. I want people, you can be anti-food assistance and be pro, hey, I want people to not have to go ask the government every week for their food stamps. Like, that doesn't sound very, pro-life to have to go be dependent upon someone else. Like, you want to have dignity. You want to have the ability to provide for yourself. So anyways, I'll let you go through. Let you have some of the other ones.
Yeah, well, I think just overall, this is just such a stupid, shallow tactic that people use when, and here, I don't even need to, we don't even need to talk about the specific merits of the pro-life or pro-choice positions when it relates to abortion in this take, right? Because all this person is saying is that if you hold the title pro-life, how can you be also pro-AR-15? And it's like, well, in the context you're using it, you're playing a stupid semantic word game where pro-life has a very specific political meaning in that context, right?
Yeah.
Saying that you do not support abortion rights from, as a guaranteed legal right or whatever. So how I can be pro-life and pro-AR-15, anti-food assistance, anti-healthcare, anti-insulin, if you want to label me all those things, which isn't fair anyway, but because pro-life only is in this political context meaning one issue. In the exact same way that I could flip this and be, I don't get it. I'm confused. You call yourself pro-choice, but you don't let me choose which government I pay taxes. I actually wanted to pay all my taxes to the great nation state of Brit Espinoza instead of paying to the Washington state, my state and United States government. So how come you don't respect, how can you call yourself pro-choice and not respect where I want to send my tax money? I mean, and that would be a stupid, absurd thing to challenge them on too, right? Because it's a very narrow point, but because it's couched in these broad terms, people use them, right? I think of the same thing with like Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives Matter has a very specific political meaning, a very specific group that has Marxist roots and is very pro like property destruction and anti-private property rights and things like that. And then people are like, well, why can't you say Black Lives Matter? And it's like, well, okay, the words individually, Black Lives Matter, is obviously true. But the fact that you want me to say it in that context is because you want me to support this other movement and you want to sort of have a gotcha there. And so in the same way, they're like, How can you be pro-life and pro AR-15? Or let death penalties better. I'm not even pro death penalty personally, but I'm sympathetic at least to the reasoning. I don't think it pans out, but it's like very easily, because pro-life is one issue and pro-death penalty is an entirely different issue.
Yes.
And then furthermore, because at least the justification for pro-death penalty would have to do with the innocence of the life being taken. Right, this person is forfeited their rights, to greater society, which again, not something I personally buy, but like, again, that's the justification very easily. Or pro AR-15, like the example you gave, anti-food assistance, the example you gave, anti-healthcare, again, and the last thing I will say is things like anti-healthcare and anti-insulin. Like, obviously, no one's going to label themselves that. We just believe in the best ways to distribute that is not through government handling, right? But this type of semantic game, you think it's just kind of a cheap tactic until you realize the serious implications it has with things like labeling people anti-vaxxers. For instance, you or I are being labeled as anti-vaxxers because we don't think that you should mandate a vaccine. Not that what you want to say on the vaccine itself, whether it's effective, whether you personally want to get it, aside, none of that matters. They've now changed the meaning of anti-vaxxer to be in this, well, you're against all vaccine mandates. And so it's like these stupid semantic games of like what these political terms that have a specific meaning, when you change that and you broaden it and you say, well, you can't really be pro-life unless you also support all of these other things that have nothing to do with it.
Yes.
And of course, supporting all these things is necessarily going to have the outcomes that are in my mind versus the outcomes, even if the outcomes we both agree on, if the way that you get there is different than me, then you're not actually supporting those things. If you think the government shouldn't hand out free insulin, then you don't want people to have insulin. It's not that you think that it gets distributed more efficiently or better, it's that you don't want them to have it. You're anti-insulin.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point, because this false choice is also like, you kind of a lot of people and politicians especially will reverse engineer it, and they'll say, well, this person supports free markets, and because free markets sometimes lead to disparate outcomes among different ethnic groups, that means you're a racist. And it's like, wow, you got from one thing to another just so you could call me this. And like, if you get fact checked, right, like the fact checkers are gonna say, well, because capitalism leads to disparate outcomes, like this person is racist. It's like, whoa, how did we get from here to there? And it's the same logic that leads to this false choice. And it's really tricky. And for people that don't have time to think about it, or that are busy living their normal life as they should, this type of post will pop up in their feed, and they'll be like, oh, I guess I can't be pro-life and pro AR-15. That makes a lot of sense. It's like, no, like we need to debunk these things, and that's why obviously we've got this show. So I don't have any more of this unless you do.
I think the only other thing is there are times when people link views together. Like I think a lot of social conservatives link things like, I'm pro-life, pro-gun, and pro-strong military, just because that's sort of been linked for them their whole life, right? Because that's what it means to be a conservative or a Republican or whatever. And it's kind of the same thing. It's like, I don't get how you could be a conservative and, be pro-foreign intervention and pro small government, right? So, but again, the general meaning of conservative is different than the like definition of conservative, and you have to break these things out. And I think it's why it's helpful to define things as like maybe like Republican or like populist Republican or all these kinds of things, because descriptive words like conservative, if you break down the actual meaning of that, like politically conservative, I do agree that I don't see how you could be politically conservative. Like conservative in the way that you think about politics and be pro foreign intervention and limited government. And I think that's a lot of the populist Republican conservative movement right now is picking up on that. But that being said, like these labels happen. And so it happens in both places where people say, how can you be both of these things because of this label? Or how can you not be these things under that label or what have you? So.
Yeah. No, that's good. All right. Moving on to our last cringe of the day, and it's by our good friends over on Instagram, anti.capitalist, and they write, Just saying, but the negative aspects of capitalism is literally what is holding the world back from being sustainable. The only reason we don't have safe drinking water, shelter, food, medicine, education, and clean energy for every person on this earth is because it wouldn't be profitable for the 0.1% of the world's population whose entire income is based solely around limiting those resources for lower class and impoverished people. Man, the grammar in this one's rough. But if you get past that, the just saying, but the negative aspects part, it's like, where does this person think that these things come from? Like, how did we first ever get safe drinking water? How did we ever first get, mass produced shelter, for us to live in houses that would have, only kings could only dream of, 100 years ago? How do we get advances in medicine and education and all these things? I remember in my economics class, like there are fundamental pillars of economics, things like scarcity and supply and demand, and people that have and have not, right? And these folks are so ignorant. Those forces in economics are as real as the law of gravity, in physics. In that, like, hey, if you have a lot of supply of something or a little supply of something, and there's a high or low demand of it, that changes what the price is, right, of those things, and it's just naturally going to happen. Those forces are as real as gravity, and these people don't understand that. They don't understand scarcity. There are resources all around us, sure, but have those resources been turned into things that are actually usable, right? Like, they don't have a concept of like marginal utility, theory of value, where it's like, hey, like, yeah, you can make a bunch of pies, with apples in them, apple pies for a village. But if everyone in the village is allergic to apples, you've made useless combination of bread and fruit. No one will eat that, right? But these people, their whole mix up of the theory of value, which I don't even know if they know what the theory of value would be, makes it so that they're unable to like engage with the world in a real way, right? Like, and that's why so many conservatives that are older, look at this and they're like, this is just stupid. Like, how do I even talk to someone about this? Because they're literally operating in a different reality than the one we live in right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's so frustrating because it's so off base. But if you wanted to sort of think about what can I salvage from this, and it's like, okay, are there powerful people that are limiting resources for poor people? And you're like, well, yeah, in a sense there are. And it's big business, big government collusion where, the government will force a monopoly to a big player and force out little people. And then that company that owns that resource can choose to discriminate and not face the repercussions of competition. And then you think about all that and you're like, wait a minute, but that's all anti-competitive practice, which is, capitalism. And this starts out by saying the negative aspects of capitalism. So you're like, there's not even a starting point where we can agree that there's, where this problem is coming from. And I just think about how so much of the resource access that these people want is stifled by government actions, not even by big business alone. Like, you think about like big fast food chains and stuff like that. And, people argue a lot of the time that, fast food has made eating healthy. You cause these cycles of like, I can't remember the term off the top of my head right now. I'm blanking on it, but it has to do with like hunger rates because of eating healthy foods are still low or something like that. I don't remember what the exact term is. Maybe you can look that up for me, or I'll look it up on a break or something. But the thing is, to me, is it's like people act as though, without like Burger King around, suddenly eating healthy, like salads and fresh fruit and fresh vegetables, just become cheaper and more plentiful. And that's just not the case, right? Places like McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and all these, they provide options that by creating value of affordable food for people. So it's like, yeah, like maybe like eating Burger King every day is not your most healthy meal, but the fact that you have access to a cheap meal when you can need one is a great thing that helps the lower socioeconomic strata more than anyone else. And that's not based on limiting resources. It's not like you're artificially stopping, broccoli supplies from being cheaper. You're creating food and sustenance that is available to be cheaper. And you know what hurts things like that from being accessible is things like inflation. You look at the inflation costs that have hit, and in a very tangible way. And this makes me think of another post I've seen that maybe I'll throw into a cringe sometime. So maybe I'll save this example. But it's just like, you think about like inflation, and you think about how that makes things like food less accessible, or you think about how governments literally own the energy resources, and they contract it out to, where they don't own the resource, but they own like the rights of a neighborhood and stuff like that. And then they contract with individual companies. And then you look at like somewhere like Washington State, and of all of the power and energy companies in the entire state, only one of them has a positive customer like feedback, and it's Puget Sound Energy, I believe. They are the only ones that have a positive rating, and the reason why is because the government taxes every other part of the state to give it money. It artificially gives them more money than they would make otherwise from other parts of the state, and that's the only reason why they have a positive rating. And you're locked out from any other competition being in there because it's a public-private monopoly. So it's not a capitalistic free market competitive enterprise, system that's creating a scarcity of resources. Capitalism is what helps spread out these resources so that people have better access to safe water, shelter, food, and medicine. Not the other way around. The elites that are preventing it are the ones who have a monopoly on force, and then can make deals using that monopoly.
Yeah, it's the line of reasoning these folks have, and I loved your example about the energy company here. But the reason these folks, like, it's very much like, well, if we want there to be food and water for everyone, like, we should just let it be so. That's literally the logic these people have, because they think if we vote on something to happen, it's just going to happen without any regard for the mechanisms behind the scenes, or not even behind the scenes, that just are required for to get goods from one place to another, or for goods to be created and to exist in the world. I was thinking about specifically like my experience, and we've talked about this before, but like with COVID this past week, I was like, well, maybe I'll get the monoclonal antibody treatment. I at least want to know that it's available so that I can get it if I get a little bit more sick. But the federal government stepped in, right? And because they thought their modeling, right, their singular source of truth, their modeling was like, well, I think everyone in the country is going to have Omicron, and our research says that maybe monoclonal antibodies don't really work well for Omicron. We're going to stop giving people monoclonal antibodies because based on our modeling, we think everyone's going to have it. And so they withdrew monoclonal antibody treatment that successfully treats Delta. And here in Seattle, I had I have a lot of connections with the medical industry, and someone that's a really high up director level told me, yeah, like for cancer patients here in Seattle, we've got 54 doses of monoclonal antibodies. When we just had 14,000 doses delivered, we literally had 14,000 doses delivered in mid-December, and they were all withdrawn because the government said, hey, these don't work. We can't let people use them anymore. I don't know if there's malicious intent behind it or not. Who cares? What is that someone at the top that doesn't have all the factors in place came in and said, hey, we're going to make this decision, and it has these disparate outcomes for people because people aren't able to make their own decisions. And so it's like, yeah, like let's say you have a button and you can push it that says everyone gets clean water or clean energy or whatever it is. No button could ever exist, right? Because there's so many different needs and ways that those needs need to be fulfilled, that you couldn't possibly do that. Literally, unless you had a magic wand that could account for everyone's individual need and circumstance, you won't be able to do that. And that's kind of the funny thing about these people, right? And why they're not based in reality, like I said previously.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because this kind of person, I feel bad for them because the point that they've gotten to, you can't legitimately look at the ways in which value is created, and you can't look at industry and the history of industry and all that. You can't really look at that and think that the way that peoples have created wealth is by limiting resources. Now, let's say that you're a skeptic and you can argue that capitalism alone, and it is capitalism's fault for things like bad working conditions or slavery or wealth inequality, those kinds of things, which we could talk about all of those and why it's not really a great metric to blame it all on capitalism and things like that. But regardless, you could look at all those things and still realize that at the end of the day, what the powerful are doing is creating new things and creating more access to things. Even if your argument is that 90% of that wealth goes to the top, it's not by limiting access to resources. It's by creating new kinds of value. And then, in their view, taking most of that value themselves or greedily or something like that, which, again, we could talk about that and have that argument. But this person is literally making the argument that these people's wealth comes from the fact that they are limiting those resources for people. And that's just not true.
It's not how you get rich.
Yeah, that's just not demonstrable by any metric. So that this is someone, again, who's just listening to someone like Hassan on Twitch or something like that, who is not particularly bright.
Yes. And like we like to say, we assemble the best and not so bright of our feeds every week. So
the problem is Hassan is the kind of person who speaks as confidently and as incorrectly as I used to in 2011 when I was talking about things like Santorum on Huckabee, right? Just as confident and just as wrong.
Yeah. Yes, please. No, thank you. Cool, man. Do you have any more on this one? I don't.
No, I'm done.
Awesome. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with us today, and we'll be back here in a couple days with some more cringe for you. Before we leave, please, again, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us get out our message of anti-cringe to the world. And if we had any takes that you thought were cringe, or if you had any feedback, or if you have any posts maybe that you've seen that you'd like us to do, be sure to submit them to us at cringepost.com. Also, you could do it at our email, which is cringepostpod@gmail.com. or at our socials at cringepostpod on Instagram and Twitter and all that stuff. We'll catch you guys later.